What if I told you that at the very moment Jesus was being crucified, the skies weren't the only thing reacting? What if, while blood spilled down the wood of the cross beneath a darkened sky, two of the most terrifying and powerful archangels in existence were already there? Silent sentinels in a cosmic war. Michael, the commander of heaven's armies, sword drawn and unwavering. Uriel, the flame of God, descending with fire in his mouth and mystery in his eyes. And between them, suspended between flesh and eternity, was the Son of God, and all of hell trembled. You've heard the story of the crucifixion 100 times, but I promise you, you've never heard it like this. Because something was moving behind the veil. Not just grief, not just glory, something fierce, something unspeakable. Forbidden knowledge, scattered in smudged ink and buried scrolls, speaks of a celestial conflict erupting while Rome thought it had won. Why did the sky go black at the 6th hour? Why does the Gospel of Peter say the sun fled in terror? And why did Matthew record the veil of the temple tearing, the earth shaking, and the dead rising, and yet say nothing of the angels? And here's where the silence becomes deliberate, because what these two angels did wasn't symbolic. It was strategic. And what Lucifer tried to do at that very moment may explain why some Gospels were erased from memory, why some scrolls were locked away in monastery vaults, never to be preached from a pulpit. But now we're unsealing them, together. And if you stay with me, if you dare to follow this thread, we'll uncover what Michael restrained, what Uriel ignited, and what Lucifer feared most. Because once you understand what really happened on that hill, you'll never see the cross the same way again. And if you're new here, subscribe and share the video. Now, let's get to it. At the 6th hour, the sky turned black. Not twilight, not storm cloud, but something colder. A silence fell that didn't belong to the world of men. People say the sun disappeared, but that doesn't capture the weight of it. According to Matthew, darkness covered the land from the 6th to the 9th hour, but other texts, buried in smoke-stained margins and left to languish in forgotten monasteries, suggest something far more deliberate. The Gospel of Peter, a suppressed and fragmentary account cut from the record, dares to say it plainly: the sun was darkened, and many went about with lamps. The heavens dimmed not from chance but from command. And so we ask, who gave that command? What if it wasn't just the world mourning, but heaven intervening, shielding something too sacred for enemy eyes? What if this was not mourning at all, but war? We were never meant to read this, but here we are. Because if we follow the trail whispered in the apocryphal texts and hinted in the canonical ones, a shape begins to emerge. A figure, wings outstretched, eyes burning like polished bronze. Michael, the archangel, the captain of celestial hosts, the one Daniel saw standing guard over Israel, the one Jude describes battling Satan over the body of Moses. And here, now, he arrives again. Not to weep, but to war. Hidden behind the curtain of human vision, the commander of heaven's armies descends to Golgotha. But he does not speak. He watches. His sword, the one Revelation calls the blade that never sleeps, glows in its sheath. He is waiting. Why? Because the order has not yet come. And beside him, lower, much lower, another flame has already touched the earth. Uriel, the flame of God, the angel of illumination and judgment. His presence isn't seen. It's felt. In the sudden chill that crawls up the spine. In the flickering of torches that should not flicker. In the way mothers hush their children without knowing why. Uriel stands at the base of the cross, silent, staring upward. What did he see? What did he sense that men could not? He is mentioned in apocryphal scrolls like 2 Esdras, where he is the angel who reveals secrets too great for human minds. And in Enoch, he is set over the abyss, the one who holds the keys to the realms of the dead. So why is he here now? What did he come to witness or ignite? This is where the silence becomes deliberate, because while priests gnashed their teeth and soldiers gambled over a dying man's clothes, the archangels stood vigil, and someone else was watching, not from below, but from beneath. A stirring in the deep. Lucifer, the fallen one. His presence is not marked by vision, but by distortion. A crackling in the spirit realm. The bitter taste of copper in the mouths of those standing too close to the cross. Something unseen pressing into the edges of the crowd. He had come too, not to grieve, to challenge. Think about it. Why does no gospel name him? Why does no epistle describe his proximity to Calvary? And yet, how could he not be there? The Son of God, dying. What else could draw the adversary like blood in the water? We were never meant to know what Lucifer tried to do beneath that hill. But fragments survive. Whispers in the ascension of Isaiah. Rumours in the writings of the early mystics. They speak of a moment when the veil between worlds thinned so dramatically that even hell had to watch. Uriel's eyes never left Christ. Michael did not draw his sword, but he gripped the hilt. There are no hymns for this moment, no stained glass windows for the dark hour when heaven prepared for its most decisive blow. But here's what most will never tell you. The darkness wasn't mourning, it was strategy. A cloaking. A divine shroud laid down over the crucifixion. Not to hide it from men, but to shield it from the watchers. And here is the question we dare to ask. Was this the moment heaven began to move against hell? Was this when the angels of judgment stepped onto the field? You were raised on the image of the cross as stillness, as suffering. But what if it was also preparation? A pause before a cosmic assault? And if the sky went black, not as lamentation but as cover, what were the angels covering? Who were they hiding it from? And what did Lucifer hope to stop before it broke loose from the veins of the Lamb? Because what Michael and Uriel saw beneath that sky, and what they were commanded to do, still echoes. In our silence, in our forgetting, in every sermon that never names them. But now we begin to name them again. And as we do, we begin to see the war in the shadows. The sky had gone dark, but the battle was just beginning. The wind shifted just after the 9th hour, and though the crowd had grown restless, something unseen pressed against the atmosphere itself. You could feel it in your ribs, like thunder before it sounds. And high above the cross, in a realm not far but veiled, Michael, the great prince who stands for the children of God, received the charge. He did not arrive like a dove, nor with the fanfare of flaming horses. He appeared as judgment itself. Not a word spoken, but all creation reacted. The rocks beneath Golgotha trembled slightly. Birds fell silent. One soldier dropped the spear he was polishing and stared at the sky, blinking like a man waking from a dream. Others didn't notice. But something had shifted in the air. A heaviness like a verdict being written. What was at stake in that moment wasn't only the flesh hanging bloodied from the wood, but the eternal implications of that blood, because it was not yet spilled without contest. And in the silence of the spiritual realm, Lucifer moved. Not as a red caricature, but as a being older than memory, once draped in glory, now blackened by pride. He appeared not with a weapon, but with accusation. It wasn't brute force he brought, it was litigation. Spiritual legalism older than Sinai. You've heard that Satan accuses the brethren, but on this day he accused the Son. He stood in a space no human eye could see and said, "He bleeds, therefore he is broken. He is cursed, therefore he is mine." You cannot redeem what is cursed. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a strategy. And if it had gone unanswered, every soul resting in Sheol, every sinner hoping for salvation, every scroll of prophecy pointing to a spotless lamb, would be mocked in eternity. That's why Michael's sword could not sleep. And maybe you were never told this. But Jude 1:9 already gave us a glimpse. Michael disputing with the devil over the body of Moses, not fighting, not shouting, but restraining. That same pattern appears here. Michael's authority is judicial. He doesn't roar, he declares. And in that moment, as Lucifer's words coiled like smoke through the spiritual plane, Michael stepped forward. Ancient apocryphal texts, buried in ash-laced vaults and cut from doctrinal memory, hint that Michael unsheathed something not of steel but of eternal fire. Not to strike the devil, but to silence him. Because if Lucifer had spoken one more accusation without rebuttal, the heavens would have echoed with a lie. You were raised on the image of Jesus suffering alone. But think about it, would heaven remain silent while the Son was condemned by hell's chief accuser? Or was someone, standing in defense just outside the veil? The Gospel of Nicodemus, in its long-buried fragments, whispers of angels trembling as Christ descended to the cross. And the Book of Enoch speaks of watchers, spiritual governors who oversee realms. Michael was not only watching, he was contending. One old rabbinic fragment, never canonized, describes Michael as the restrainer of unclean tongues at sacred thresholds. What do you think that meant at Calvary? Now picture this. Michael between the cross and the abyss, Lucifer still clinging to some twisted hope that he could corrupt the moment, infect the blood, desecrate the offering before it reached the throne. And Michael, still blazing, terrible, declares, "The Lord rebuke you." That phrase may sound familiar, but don't mistake its simplicity. Those words once kept the devil from seizing Moses. Now they burned with even greater weight. Spoken not for the sake of a prophet, but for the Lamb himself. At that moment, something rippled through the earth. A merchant near the temple dropped his coins without knowing why. A young girl, drawing water from a well, felt a shiver run down her spine. And a Roman centurion at the foot of the cross paused only for a heartbeat, as if hearing a sound that hadn't reached the ears of men yet. But that's not the part we were supposed to remember, because in the Western canon, Michael is largely quiet. You won't hear his name at the crucifixion. His role has been tucked away in letters, in shadows, cut from sermons, erased from memory. But the early church wasn't so silent. Why else would Jude preserve a single line of that celestial dispute, like a thread waiting to be pulled? Revelation 12 doesn't just cast Michael as a defender, it calls him a dragon slayer. And if that battle in heaven happened, then why does the text echo it again now? Is it possible this wasn't a one-time event, but a pattern? Lucifer rises. Michael answers. Always at the tipping point. Always when something sacred is about to be claimed. We don't have to invent new theology to ask these questions. We only need to open our eyes to what was buried. Some old Ethiopian manuscripts, ignored by most seminaries, describe angelic hosts watching the crucifixion from a high place, forbidden to intervene except by divine command. And in one ancient Eastern fragment, never canonized but passed along in whispers, Michael is said to have hovered above the cross, not shielding Jesus, but shielding the sacrifice from corruption, a purification flame, a legal firewall. What would have happened if he hadn't? You think that's the end? That's only what the Western canon allowed. Now look deeper. The book of Zechariah already gave us a court scene. Joshua, the high priest, standing accused, and Satan ready to condemn. What changed that scene? The angel of the Lord, defender, intercessor, warrior. Isn't the cross just a cosmic repeat of that trial? Only now the stakes were creation itself. And if Satan was bold enough to enter a heavenly courtroom before the resurrection, do we think he stayed silent on crucifixion day? No, he came with one last case to win. But Michael answered, and in that answer, the silence of heaven held its line. But here's the question that still burns. What was the cost of that restraint? What did Michael feel as he stood, sword drawn, but never striking? What did it cost to hold the line while the sun was dying and the enemy slithered forward with accusation? Maybe we'll never know, but what if that's the point? What if the real war wasn't fought in violence, but in silence, submission, obedience? Michael did not need to crush Lucifer. He needed only to block him, because judgment belonged to another, the Lamb. And as the blood began to fall, Michael stepped back. His part was done, for now, But the air didn't clear. Not yet, because someone else was moving below the surface, and Michael wasn't the only angel on assignment that day. Uriel did not descend with wings of flame or thunder on his back, but with silence so total it chilled the bones of the earth itself. As Michael restrained the darkness from above, as the blood of the Lamb began to trace lines down the broken wood of the cross, Uriel turned toward the underworld. The skies had already dimmed, the veil of heaven holding back a storm not of clouds but of judgment. And now the time had come for the fire to fall inward. The watchers above the hill felt it like a tremor behind the veil. Something ancient was stirring beneath them, far below Golgotha, where light had not touched since Eden. And Uriel, known in ancient texts as the Flame of God, the guardian of Tartarus, the revealer of divine mysteries, began to move into a realm even angels feared. The Book of Enoch, preserved only in dusty Ge'ez manuscripts and cut from the canon of the West, tells us that Uriel is set over the world and over Sheol itself. He is the one who explains what terrifies others to even witness. And in that moment beneath the cross, he carried not just light, but a warrant, a heavenly summons. A scroll of fire inked in judgment. What had been concealed since the rebellion was about to be announced? But to whom? Sheol, the realm of the dead, the waiting room of souls, did not look like flames and brimstone, not at first. It was a courtroom half buried in sorrow. Echoes of ancient sins clung to the walls like incense in a forgotten temple. The souls of the righteous and the wicked dwelled there in separation, divided by unseen laws, waiting, always waiting. Some cried out in songs of lament. Some sat in silence, clutching memories they no longer understood. And when Uriel arrived, even the air recoiled. His flame did not burn them, but it revealed them. He walked through the shadows with the steadiness of someone who had been here before. You were taught that Christ descended after the cross, but what if heaven began its descent before the final breath? What if judgment was already preparing its case? This is not wild speculation. The second book of Esdras, also called 4 Ezra, an apocryphal text revered in the Ethiopian canon, and influential in early Jewish mysticism, describes Uriel as the angel who is sent to answer Ezra's plea for divine justice. He is not gentle, he does not console, he interrogates. He reveals what men should not know unless summoned to divine court. In that same spirit, here, at the edge of the abyss, Uriel did not preach, he did not comfort, he opened his scroll. Ancient chains trembled. The gate of Sheol, carved with forgotten names, responded as if listening. "It is beginning," he said, though no mouth moved. And something answered back from within the stones. "You have heard the story of Jesus' death. You've heard of the sky going dark. But has anyone told you about the realm that was being prepared below? About the angel who arrived not to speak, but to unveil? Picture it. As Roman soldiers laughed and cast lots for a bloody robe, an angel stepped through the dust of Sheol, eyes lit with flame, holding a document of war. And this document wasn't written in ink. It was scribed in delay. Every century heaven had waited to fulfill its word. Because what was about to happen would reverse not just sin, but the silence of generations. The flame that Uriel bore was not just light, it was revelation. In Enoch, he stands over the abyss, watching the judgment of the fallen angels. In 2 Esdras, he rebukes those who demand answers too soon. In both, he is never idle. So why, on the most sacred day in all creation, would he stand still? And here's where the silence becomes deliberate. The early church knew of Uriel. His name was etched into ancient liturgies. Eastern manuscripts whispered of his role in the mysteries of the grave. But somewhere in the long narrowing of Western canon, his flame was snuffed out from memory, cut from the record, buried beneath more palatable angels. You were never told about this descent, but here we are. The moment Christ was crucified, Uriel was not idle. He was issuing summons, preparing a courtroom. A judgment was coming, not just for sin, but for death itself. Can you picture it? Chains that had never broken before began to rattle. Souls once asleep stirred in strange anticipation. The prophets, Daniel, Isaiah, even David, felt the shift. They had spoken of this. "You will not abandon me to Sheol," David wrote in Psalm 16, "nor will you allow your Holy One to see decay." And now the Holy One's blood was falling drop by drop above their prison. They didn't yet see him, but they felt the weight of heaven leaning in. Uriel walked past the gates of the wicked, past the chambers of the watchers, past the thrones of forgotten spirits. Every step was judgment wrapped in flame. He was not the deliverer, that was Christ alone, but he was the one who lit the path. Do you feel it? The quiet horror of an enemy who knows he's already lost but refuses to surrender? Lucifer felt it. Somewhere in the rising smoke of Golgotha, the accuser felt something slip through his grasp. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. He had whispered through the crowds, stirred the hearts of betrayers, even tempted the very Son of God. But he had not prepared for this, a descent of fire. An angel carrying sealed words of old, Uriel didn't need to rebuke him. His presence alone was the rebuke. What secrets did Uriel whisper into the dark? What names were called? What records unsealed? Can you imagine what it would have meant if this never happened? If Sheol remained closed, if light never pierced its walls, if the sacrifice above the hill had no echo below it? This moment was not just drama. It was doctrine in fire, and it has been buried in smoke-stained margins, lost to sermons that forgot the second half of the war. But that fire is still burning. We were never meant to read this. But here we are. Uriel's mission wasn't to destroy, but to prepare. The righteous would not be abandoned. The lost would not be forgotten, not anymore. And as he stood before the courtroom of death, holding a scroll that glowed with unseen words, Sheol began to crack. The gates were weakening. Something was coming through. And Uriel, silent, bright, immovable, waited. The moment of judgment had not yet arrived, but the world beneath the world had been warned, because next the blood would fall. And when it did, the veil would tear above, and the abyss would open below. The ninth hour came like a held breath. The sky, already dimmed by angelic veiling, turned blacker still. Wind fell silent. The crowd around the cross hushed without understanding why, as if nature itself had paused. Then came a cry, not loud, not long, but final. "It is finished." And in that instant, reality tore. The veil in the temple, 4 inches thick, ripped from top to bottom, not from human hands, not from below, from the heavens. It split like thunder, as if heaven itself could no longer watch in silence. But it wasn't just the veil that tore, it was something deeper, something older. Across dimensions, from the courts of glory to the gates of Sheol, the entire cosmos reeled at the death of the Son of God. You've heard those words before. It is finished. But what did they mean in the unseen world? What if that was not only a declaration, but a verdict? A final gavel in the court of divine justice? You were taught to see Jesus' death as sacrifice. But what if, at that exact moment, it was also a sentence being carried out? A pronouncement heard by angels and demons alike, a legal decree that no power in heaven or hell could now contest. Michael stood motionless above Golgotha. His wings, outstretched, did not move. His sword, flaming with divine authority, had not struck, but now it lowered slightly, not in surrender, but in awe. There was no need for force. The Lamb had finished the work no sword could accomplish, and Uriel, flame of God, still deep within Sheol, paused mid-step. His fire did not blaze. It pulsed, once, then roared inward, collapsing into a white-hot silence that only the dead could feel. In the ancient texts of the Gospel of Nicodemus, labelled apocryphal but rich in mystery, it is written that when Christ died, a voice echoed through the underworld. Not the voice of Jesus, not yet, but a herald. Some say it was Uriel, others say it was an unnamed messenger bearing light. But the message shattered stone. Prepare. He is coming. Beneath the hill, in chambers forgotten by men, Lucifer stumbled. He had felt tremors before. He had endured angelic wars. But this was different. The air thickened, heavy with something he had not sensed in millennia. Judgment. What did he think in that moment? We can't read his thoughts, but we can watch his posture. His form, once towering and crowned with counterfeit splendor, recoiled. His gaze turned upward, not in reverence, but in dread. He had mocked the plan. He had celebrated the cross as a victory. But something in that cry, "It is finished," broke the spell. Did he realize too late what had happened? That the blood was not a loss but a key? That the death he engineered had become the door he could never close again? And here's where the silence becomes deliberate. The heavens did not erupt with song. The angels did not declare. Not yet. They watched. They waited. And Michael, still guarding the spiritual perimeter of Golgotha, did not depart. He bowed his head, not in defeat, but in reverence. That silence was the loudest sound in eternity. Have you ever wondered why no gospel speaks of angels at the moment of death? Why there is a supernatural earthquake, a torn veil, risen saints, but no mention of Michael? No word of Uriel? Could it be that what happened was too holy to name, cut from the record to preserve its power? Or was it simply hidden, buried in ink-stained manuscripts and the smoke-darkened footnotes of early apocryphal texts? Pause and reflect. If even the angels held their breath, what should we do when we remember the cross? And what if I told you this wasn't the end? Not even close. Because what moved at that moment didn't just end an age, it began an invasion, a descent, a rupture beneath the surface of reality. In 1 Peter 3:19, it is written that Christ, after being made alive in the Spirit, went and preached to the spirits in prison. That verse, canonical and ancient, is often overlooked. But what does it mean that he preached to imprisoned souls? And what if the preparations for that descent had already begun, even before he died? Uriel had descended not just to witness, he had gone to prepare. The gates of Sheol, once cold and locked, now pulsed with heat. Not the heat of wrath, but of impending glory. You were raised to see the crucifixion as a purely earthly event. But what if the real war happened where no eye could see? Imagine this: the veil tears, the earth quakes, and in the realm of spirits, chains begin to tremble. Unseen hands loosen ancient bonds. The dead, long held in waiting, begin to stir. Not awake, not yet, but aware. In the shadows of that realm, something stirs in response. Perhaps even Hades itself cries out, as later apocryphal texts poetically suggest, "Who is this King of glory?" And the voice answers, not with words, but with fire. Uriel's flame flickers once more. Lucifer flees deeper into the recesses of the underworld, but light is coming. The judgment has been rendered. It is finished. Did not end the fight. It declared the outcome. From here on, every demonic whisper, every shadowed rebellion, was operating on borrowed time. And you were never meant to hear this version of the story. But you're still listening, and we're not finished yet. Because what comes next isn't quiet. It's not sorrow. It's not mourning. The angels are about to move. Judgment is about to become action. So ask yourself, what happened in those 3 days between death and resurrection? And what exactly did Uriel ignite in the depths when heaven finally saw the blood? There are moments when the silence of heaven gives way not to words but to war. This was that moment. Sheol, long undisturbed, began to shake, not with noise, but with pressure, like something ancient had been broken loose and was now pressing against its own walls. The gates, carved with curses and sealed in forgotten pacts, groaned, not metaphorically, not poetically. They groaned, as though the very iron could sense it had lost its authority. Uriel was the first to move. The flame that had been pulsing in stillness now spread outward in rings of silent fire. He did not lift a sword. He did not shout. He walked, and with each step the walls responded. The Gospel of Nicodemus, a text rejected by Western councils but revered in the East, speaks of this moment with trembling detail. It says that the princes of Sheol, those spiritual beings set over the place of the dead, saw a light they had never seen before and were afraid. But it was not the light of wrath. It was the light of a verdict made visible. And Uriel carried that light like a blade. One step deeper, chains broke. Another step, thrones cracked. You were taught that angels minister to the living, but what if some were sent to the dead? What if some were ordained not to comfort, but to dismantle? Pause and consider that. If even Sheol can be invaded, what part of creation is beyond redemption's reach? Above, Golgotha sat in eerie stillness, the cross still holding the lifeless body of the Son of God. Blood touched soil. The earth had split, but not just on the surface. Cracks now ran through dimensions, and in that tremor, Michael moved. His sword, held steady for hours, now gleamed with new purpose. He did not descend into Sheol as Uriel did. He struck downward with a wordless command, and though the blade did not touch earth, its power did. In Daniel 10 and Revelation 12, we are told Michael wars against principalities. But here, it was not a war of armies. It was a war of declarations. Judgment had been issued, the Lamb had died, and now the rightful king was descending to collect what was his. And here's where the records grow strange. The Gospel of Bartholomew, speculative and apocryphal, claims that the archangels stood guard as Christ descended into the abyss, clearing the path, terrifying the spirits that had long ruled there. Whether this is literal or poetic, we may never know. But what we do know is this: Sheol was not ready, and Lucifer, who had once ruled in arrogance, was unravelling. The deeper Uriel went, the more the realm reacted. The souls of the righteous stirred, not awakened yet, but stirred. Abraham, David, the prophets, they felt the light, not the fullness of Christ's presence, but the shockwave of his approach. And across the chasm, in the place reserved for the rebellious, the watchers and the wicked felt it too, but not as comfort, as dread. One ancient Ethiopian scroll, considered apocryphal but deeply honoured in the Orthodox Tewahedo tradition, speaks of angelic presences who move like thunder without sound, terrifying even the chained ones beneath the earth. This was no rescue mission. This was conquest. You've heard of the harrowing of hell as legend. But what if it was more than that? What if it was the fulfillment of a cosmic order, the final reversal of a rebellion that began before time was measured? Now feel the shift. The gates of Sheol did not open as doors. They cracked like bones, not shattered, but broken from within. The locks melted, not from heat, but from authority. The king was near, and he had not spoken yet, not in this realm. But even the absence of his voice carried power. Lucifer fled. Yes, fled. The accuser who once stood boldly before thrones now fled into shadow. He knew that voice. He had heard it at creation. He had tried to twist it in the wilderness. And now, at the edge of the grave, he heard it again. Not as a question, but as a coming. Think about that. What kind of presence causes darkness itself to retreat? What kind of authority walks into death not as a visitor, but as its judge? You were never told about this moment. It's not in most Sunday sermons, not in tidy gospel tracts. But the early church knew. The Apostles' Creed says, he descended to the dead. And the Bible, in 1 Peter 3:19, says, he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. That's not metaphor. That's movement. That's invasion. And what if I told you the angels didn't just witness it? They led the charge. Michael flanked the borders. Uriel lit the corridors. And then, the moment that defies all description, the presence of Christ entered Sheol. Not seen, not yet, but felt. Imagine this with me. Every fallen principality suddenly silenced, every mocking spirit struck dumb, and in the place where hope had long decayed, a pressure builds, not of fear, but of unbearable holiness. The king was coming through the gates, not as a victim, not as a ghost, as the resurrecting power himself. And Uriel turned toward the broken thrones, not to speak, but to stand. Fire surrounded him, not wild, but controlled. A fire that did not consume the righteous, but exposed the guilty. And Michael's sword blazed brighter. He did not strike. He did not need to. His presence was enough to hold back the panic, now tearing through the ranks of hell. Do you understand what this means? At the very lowest point of history, when Christ's body hung lifeless on the cross, he was simultaneously claiming dominion over the very realm death had claimed as its own. And the angels, long hidden from this story, were not absent. They were essential. Heaven had sent its two most mysterious servants, Michael, defender of the throne, Uriel, bearer of divine flame, one above, one below, both moving at once, both clearing the way. This part of the story was not meant to be lost, but it was. Suppressed in councils, omitted from liturgies, hidden in monastery vaults. Even now, we speak of the cross as sacrifice, but rarely as invasion. Yet that's what it was. The victory wasn't just won. It was taken, declared, enforced. Hell was not emptied with a key. It was overwhelmed by a king. And we were never meant to read this. But we're still reading, still uncovering, because what happens next doesn't just shift the realm of the dead. It alters everything. Because next comes resurrection. They said these stories were too mystical, too dangerous, too speculative to endure. And yet, like a coal buried in ash, they kept burning. Scrolls once sealed in desert caves are being unrolled by trembling hands. Scholars, pastors, even everyday believers are asking questions that generations were warned not to ask. Why did the early church speak so freely of angels at the cross? And why did those voices go silent? Why did traditions across Ethiopia, Armenia, and the early desert fathers preserve stories of Michael and Uriel that Western Christianity buried? And what if their rediscovery now is not an accident, but a summons? Something is happening. You can feel it. There's a hunger rising across the world, not just for information, but for meaning. People are tired of safe, sanitized versions of Scripture. They want the raw story, the real weight, the mystery that once made believers fall to their knees in awe. You were never told that angels might have guarded the cross, that they may have descended into Sheol before the resurrection, clearing the path for the King of Glory. But now you know, and the question isn't whether these stories are true in every historical detail. The question is why they were silenced, and why they still burn in the imagination of the faithful. A young woman in Addis Ababa weeps in a stone chapel, listening to the liturgy of Michael in Ge'ez. She cannot read the scrolls herself, but she has heard the stories since childhood. She says she feels their presence during prayer, especially during Lent. In a university library in Oxford, a student stumbles across a dusty footnote in a banned gospel and spends the next 4 years tracking angelic appearances in apocalyptic texts. He doesn't know if they're literal, but he says they make the Gospels feel alive again. In a tiny church in Cairo, a Coptic priest speaks of Uriel without hesitation. To him, Uriel is not folklore. Uriel is fire and justice and light, assigned by God, not legend. These are not isolated awakenings. This is the Spirit breathing through forgotten pages, reanimating the hidden drama of redemption. And here's where the silence becomes deliberate. For centuries, the Western canon has emphasized the cross in legal terms: atonement, substitution, payment, all of which are true. But what if it was also warfare? What if it was not just the forgiveness of sin, but the invasion of darkness? And what if Michael and Uriel were part of that invasion, not as footnotes, but as agents of glory? You were raised on 66 books. But what if your ancestors read 81? What if the full story of the crucifixion includes dimensions we're only now beginning to understand? This isn't about rewriting scripture. It's about reopening our eyes. We do not need to add to the Bible to be awed by it. We need to let it breathe again. To listen to the tremors between the lines, to hear what the early church dared to say before councils tightened the canon and doctrine was chained to categories. Think about it. Michael, mentioned only a handful of times in our Bibles, yet always at the centre of cosmic conflict. Uriel, absent from most modern texts, yet present in Jewish apocalyptic literature and ancient Christian tradition as the illuminator, the fire-bearer, the one who stands where no others dare. Why were these names forgotten? Why were these missions buried? And why are they resurfacing now? Maybe it's because we are standing again on the edge of something. Maybe, as spiritual confusion thickens across the globe and the old frameworks crack, we need a bigger gospel. Not a different gospel, but one that includes the full scope of God's victory, above, below, and within. The rediscovery of Michael and Uriel at the cross is not just academic curiosity, it's an act of spiritual resistance, against amnesia, against domesticated faith, against the theft of wonder. These names, these flames, these stories, they were never meant to disappear. And if they are returning now, perhaps it is because we are being called to remember what the cross really was, the convergence point of all things visible and invisible. You weren't meant to find this story. Not here. Not now. But you did. And if you've come this far, you're not just a listener. You're a witness. So ask yourself, what will you do with what has been restored? Michael stood above, sword drawn but unsheathed, guarding what could not be seen. Uriel walked below, fire sealed in his limbs, lighting the corridors of death before the king arrived. These names were buried, their roles erased or reduced to footnotes. Their presence at the cross was not taught to you, but they were there, and some remembered. Monks in the Ethiopian highlands, priests in forgotten rites, ancient believers who knew the cross was not just sacrifice, it was conquest. Why were these things kept from you? Why did your tradition tell you the sky went dark, but never said who veiled it? Why did they preach, "It is finished," but never asked what trembled beneath that cry? Think about that. Think about what was lost. Because if you've come this far, you're not just listening. You're recovering something. Something holy. Something dangerous. The scroll was never burned. It was hidden. And now, it waits for someone willing to see, for someone willing to carry the weight of knowing. You weren't meant to find this by accident. That hunger you feel, that fire behind your ribs, that tremor in your prayers, that's not emotion, that's recognition. Something in you knows this is real, that angels wept at the cross, that they guarded it, that they terrified hell itself in obedience to the Lamb who bled between worlds. And if that's true, then the gospel is even more glorious than we thought. If that's true, then spiritual warfare is not a metaphor. It's history and prophecy. And maybe, just maybe, the silence around Michael and Uriel wasn't just forgetfulness. Maybe it was fear. Because once you see them, once you understand what they were sent to do, you can't go back to comfortable faith. You have to choose to worship differently, to read differently, to live as if the sky is not empty and the grave is not silent. The scroll waits for its reader. The angels still watch. The question is, will we? If this journey stirred something in you, do not let it vanish in the noise. There are more whispers hidden in Scripture's pages, waiting to be uncovered. Stay with us. Subscribe. Listen closer, and keep walking this narrow road between thunder and silence. I look forward to seeing you again.